We are here with a very special guest and friend of ours. He's got so many titles in front of his name, I'm just going to let him ramble them all off because I'm not sure I'll remember them all. Gary, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Gary Simmons. I'm an ordained Unity minister. I've been in ministry for over 41 years. I've served on the board of trustees of the International Association of Unity Churches. I pioneered four ministries. Jane and I just completed almost 6 years at Unity Spiritual Center in Spokane, where we have been implementing and field testing a new ministry practice that I call the integral ministry practice. And we're excited about how it might be something that offers an alternative to our current minister-centered model of ministry. So my titles, I don't know that I have any more titles specifically. Shad, was there anything specific that...
There's like doctor, reverend, there's...
Oh, Reverend Doctor. I'm a 4th degree black belt in Taekwondo. I'm a private pilot. I've built 4 airplanes.
You started 4 ministries and built 4 airplanes. Did you ever notice that
Is it
coincides?
plane per ministry?
No, it's so I don't golf. So my hobby is, building stuff. I'm a very creative person, so I like to stay busy. I'd like to physically work with making things. So.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Well, I'd like to kind of get the understanding of how you wound up where you are. You've talked about the mission-centric ministry and the integral model. And I think any minister coming into ministry or anyone who's been in service in ministry on the board or something, at some point, it seems like you realize something's wrong with what we're trying to do. Right. It just doesn't quite work the way it is.
Well, I was also director of peacemaking services for Unity Worldwide. And during that time, I created many processes that were created to help support churches that were either in transition or conflict or wanting to just grow. And in the course of doing that for a good number of years, I discovered that all of my efforts were in vain, that there was a greater reality that I wasn't quite connected to in my work. And for me, that greater reality is that our current ministry practice, which is over 400 years old, which is also centered around the minister as being the central figure or the glue, the centrism of the organization, I realized that ministry practice was unsustainable and it had too many unintended consequences, especially exacerbated by circumstances in these times. So after I had left the director of peacemaking services role, I became assistant vice president of integral operations at the home office there at Unity Worldwide. And in association with Reverend James Trapp, I made an effort to create new cultural shifts with respect to how we as a denomination were in our own ministry practice. And we worked with the home office. And then later on, as things changed, I eventually went on my own and started to work with coaching churches and colleagues into figuring out how we can approach the issues that face our movement today and turn the tide with respect to the decline.
And some of the things, and Melissa can probably chime in on this because she was my board president for much of the time while I was in Uni of Las Vegas.
I spent most of the time just like blacked out though, like not trying to really like...
You were just sleeping through most of everything we did there.
Most of the meetings. Only when you were talking.
That's why I didn't feel like I had much support. Now I'm realizing this. But there's a lot of things I was coming to. One, I was giving talk after talk after talk, and it didn't feel like the congregation was really growing. And I thought I was getting really good information, insightful tools, but we weren't really growing anywhere. And also that I was getting just completely burnt out by trying to do all the things that need to be done in a church, but not being able to engage people to help in the process. You had your core volunteers that were helping out, they're on the board, but once you tax out or overload your core volunteers, that's it. You just can't seem to go beyond there. And so I just kept hitting all these ceilings in this different direction where I didn't feel like I could get anywhere with what I was trying to do. And me and Melissa would sit down and go, well, maybe we need to do this and maybe we do that. But the problem was always bigger than what we were looking at. And maybe you can speak to that. It's just we couldn't tackle one or two things to find a solution because the problem always just seemed bigger than all of it.
Those were just symptoms. Each of the things that we sat down to talk about were really just symptoms of like a core problem.
Right. Part of the challenge is that these kinds of issues are very complex. In other words, there's no simple way of addressing why is there not more engagement for people. And I'm like you, Shad. I mean, as a former martial artist, I would teach martial arts, and I would expect the students to kind of progress in a systematic way to mastery. And with church, with a congregation, everyone's at a different level of emotional and spiritual maturity, and so it's very difficult to bring a kind of systematic message that helps develop the congregation and bring them into greater ownership, because people come when they come, and they it's very rare for people to be there every single Sunday. And so you're always trying to get people to kind of understand and be on the same page, and that's sort of part of the challenge. In addition to that, there's all the family system dynamics that are problematic, especially in smaller churches of under 100 in terms of the congregational size. And with the family system dynamics afoot, that means that there's a high degree of dysfunction associated with small ministry. And not to mention that there's also the dynamic of Pareto's principle, which is the 80-20% rule. So 20% provide most of what's going on that help, and you can't really create a thriving organization with just 20% ownership.
Mm-hmm. And that brings up, and let's see if you remember this. Well, I actually pulled the financials for Uni of Las Vegas at one point, and discovered that my wife, Erna, and I were the largest contributors to the church. And, it's like we were the top in the top 20 of the 20 people that were giving. And I almost started bawling because it just was this complete letdown that, I was buying more of my own product than anyone else. Is what it felt like. And I remember giving a talk and saying, if this was a cupcake shop and I was eating more of my own cupcakes than I was selling, we have a big problem. This is not a sustainable system. And, but, it's not like telling a congregation is going to turn that around, because guilt's not going to do it. It has to be something bigger than that. Like you're talking about, there has to be a spiritual maturity towards ownership before a system really is going to be successful. You can't guilt people there. You can't give them one or two classes to get there. It's really an entire spiritual growth to get there. And that's what I think we kept bumping into.
Right, and I think that we really have to create a different context for our ministry experience for church. In other words, right now our context for church is that here's the church, here's the steeple, open the doors, see all the people, and or the plop, pay, pray model of ministry. I mean, it's sort of everybody falls into that kind of dynamic, and so to create a different context for why we come together. That everybody kind of shares this is something that is very important and vital to our well-being, to come together to really be in spiritual practice or spiritual community, to really be intending to help co-create something that matters in this world. So when you think about a congregation, does the congregation think or believe that they are co-creating something that matters and makes a difference in the world? It's likely that few congregations think that about their effort when they come together in their experience of ministry. Mm-hmm. So this is the heart of the integral ministry practice, is that part of the process of bringing people into ownership is helping them see that they can matter and make a difference in so far as the well-being of the organization is concerned.
So how did you come up with your integral model? Like, did you look around and see like some some of the mega churches or something that like was success, like other formats that were successful. I mean, it's easier to point out what isn't working, but how did you come up with this solution or an option for a solution?
All right. Well, I did my doctoral dissertation on creating thriving, coherent, and integral New Thought churches using an integral approach and second-tier practices. So I received my doctoral my doctoral degree was based upon my work in applying integral theory to issues of church growth and development. So I formulated a new ministry model based upon my doctoral research and work. My dissertation did a survey of 300 New Thought churches, and to try to identify the components that constitute a thriving church community and organization. And in the course of that research, identifying not so much the things that people are doing that create thriving and healthy organizations, but what brings them into community together and brings them into the effort to matter is what really was evident. So as I worked with integral theory, I was asked by Ken Wilbur to write an article for his Journal of Integral Theory and Practice, which I did. And subsequently, Jane and I, my wife, Reverend Dr. Jane, is also a part of this. She and I went and met with Ken Wilbur on a couple of occasions, at least two. And we recently had a Zoom session with him to discuss elements of what I'm working on right now, which is a book on integral ministry practice. So the new model of ministry is something I've just made up.
Well, it sounds like you looked at what the issues are from some of the inside and the outside. I mean, you looked at from a minister's perspective, you were there, you dealt with those issues. And then from a research perspective, looking at a larger sample size to say, what are the issues we're all having? And then maybe some people have figured out some solutions to those issues. But if we gathered all the issues, we have to find solutions to those issues. And maybe no one has the one solution. But if we're looking at all the problems, we might be able to track ourselves backwards to the source of those issues and find how do you address that source. And you talked about ownership and buy-in. And that's I think, was one of the most difficult things we dealt with. Because if you're not in church leadership, you probably can relate to the idea that a lot of people come to church in need. They need something to be served in their life. They've had a loss financially or physically or relational. And they come to church and they get, may take a few weeks, they get hope again. They feel better about themselves. They get some tools to work on. And once they get those, oftentimes they leave. And then you don't see that person again until the next hardship in their life. So they're not developing a sustained growth through that process because they're just showing up when they need something. And sometimes it's just around Christmas and Easter, whatever it might be. But to really have that sustained spiritual growth that just builds upon what was learned last time, you have to have buy-in, you have to have consistency, and you have to have people that are not only there for themselves, but they're there for the growth of what we're all working on. We're all helping each other to work on.
Absolutely. And part of the creating of the context that helps draw people into greater ownership and engagement is that we selected a specific mission statement that would help galvanize the community into a greater sense of cohesion. So they didn't have a mission statement when we first arrived, or if they did, it was in such obscurity that it wasn't really a component that informed their decisions at all. And so we just told them that we're going to have a practice mission statement, because most churches never ever experience the fulfillment of their purpose in the individuals' lives in the community. Mm-hmm. And so transforming lives and inspiring people to make a positive difference in our world was what we brought people into. This is why we're here. This is what Unity Spiritual Center stands for, that we come together to transform our lives so that we can make a difference in this world. And so, interestingly, enough, less people who are at that place where they wanted to be served or they wanted to be taken care of found necessarily a sanctuary with us. However, those same people, when they stick with us, got what they needed and then became some of our more stronger owners. And so as people actually experienced transformation in their own personal life, they wanted others to have that same experience. And so people began to give into the sense of that we're creating a world that works for everyone because this is our mission. Anyway, that's one of the big things. Perhaps the biggest thing that really helped us kind of propel ourselves in this new ministry practice was the shadow work component. Mm-hmm. So Wilbur often talks about what brings us into our highest level of functioning is when we live in the context of waking up, growing up, cleaning up, and showing up. In other words, as ministry becomes a dynamic where people are engaged, not just in their head, but in their hearts and in their whole bodies, and in the context of coming to kind of awaken into a greater reality of their essence, their sense of connection, their wholeness, growing into a greater sense of having more and more perspectives, can be able to live in a great sense of empathy and understanding for what is happening in our human family's experience, cleaning up, reconciling those aspects of ourself that live in the disconnect, our unworthiness, our sense of not enough, our inadequacy, a belief that we don't matter. And then once we are engaged in those dynamics, we can show up in a way that frees us from having to make a difference because we don't like what's going on. We make a difference because we're here to invite people into a greater sense of well-being and integrity. So those were some of the ways in which we rebranded the context within church. In other words, you don't come to church to kind of necessarily hear a talk and get pumped up. Come to church because we're here to learn about tools that transform our lives.
So you've mentioned two things that not necessarily I'm sure everyone knows about, which is Ken Wilber and integral. Can you give sort of a short synopsis of what those two things are?
Well, could you just read us your dissertation
real quick
on what integral theory is?
It's that thick. So, Ken Wilber is probably the most famous, world-renowned philosopher and integral theorist. He's written tons and tons of books. Integral theory was something that he created. It came through him, his way of being able to map out all dynamics. In other words, in any dynamic of life, there is the internal and the external dimension of something, right? Mm-hmm. And in any dynamic of life, there's the individual and the collective aspect of something. And so in this way, we have four quadrants of dynamics, or four quadrants or domains of development, where the individual, in the sense of their own interior, that's consciousness. The collective interior of individuals, that's culture. The exterior individual, it's a thing, it's a body, it's a person. The external collective of those externals are systems, relational dynamics. And so he's constructed a model in which we can look at anything and begin to understand the wholeness of some individual thing, as well as an interconnection to all the things that it is nested in.
And that seems to be what you run into in church, are those four things. And if you're trying to address one, the other three are sort of running amok. They're like the three cats running out of the room. You try to switch and address another one, then the other three are moving and running out of the room. And if you're not finding a way to address all four of those, the individual, internal, external, the collective, internal, external, then you're not moving everyone together in the same direction. And that's where we find, you could have individual dynamics where people are saying, I think the lights are too bright. And the other side is, no, I think they're too dark, or I don't like the smell of the carpet, or I love the smell of that. And now you're trying to address all the individual needs of everyone, and nobody's happy.
Right.
Because the individual mindset is all looking for what they get out of the experience, not what what is the collective experience. So there's so many dynamics at play. If you're not able, which most ministers seem to barely have the time to even think about what's next, to really step back and look at the holistic system, it's almost doomed to fail. Either the minister's going to burn out or the congregation's going to have an uprising. It just seems to be a matter of time.
So we were never taught in ministerial school to work with the interiors of ministry. We were only taught to work with the exteriors. So consequently, our focus is on, making sure that people are doing this or not doing that. We're focused on growing numbers, and that we're trying to drive the organization through and addressing exterior dynamics as opposed to looking at consciousness and culture. Mm-hmm. Consciousness and culture eclipse all the dynamics in the outer, because as within, so without, as above, so below. So the congregation cannot outperform what the leadership is capable of modeling. So that's another dynamic that's important that integral theory reveals. Integral theory reveals certain principles, such as I just mentioned, as above, so below. Below not being derogatory, but below in terms of the quadrants. The lower quadrants have to do with the community, the congregation, the culture, and the relational dynamics of the ministry. So as above, so below. So the leadership models, the community modulates with that. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the dynamic. So we have to kind of recognize that for the longest time, we have never really worked with the whole of ministry. We've just worked with its various parts.
And I want to go back to something, and Melissa, you can chime in if this sparks a thought, but you talked about a mission statement, having a mission statement. And, so many organizations I've been with have a mission statement, and it's printed and it's put up on the wall somewhere, and there's a boat in a picture next to it or something sitting there. But you never heard the mission statement brought into the big decisions. You never hear the mission statement brought into the boardroom or the executive team meeting every time you make a decision to say, does this align with our mission? It just kind of sat in the background as this is our mission that we have for the outward facing people that care about missions, but we don't actually weigh our decisions against it or our directions against it, which is somewhat in line with what I was trying to accomplish with the prosperity class I created when I was in Las Vegas. If you don't have a focus for your life, if you don't have a single focus that's your utmost priority, how do you know if your decisions are in alignment with that or not, or going in a direction you want to go with? You just buy whatever you see in front of you. You just go in whatever direction seems the most enticing at the time, because you don't really have a mission for your life. But having one, you've held on to it and said, this is important to me. This is what I value. It's my children. Some people say it's my children are first. All right, well, every decision you should make would be weighed against, does this put your children first? You're going to buy yourself a nice sports car. Does that put your children first? Oh, well, no, not necessarily. But having something like that brings your decisions back to what are we actually trying to accomplish here is so valuable. But I think so few of us personally and organizationally actually do that, actually really understand what that mission is for.
Right. So that's very common, and we knew that would be a trap that we could easily fall into if we weren't approaching it differently. So consequently, at every board meeting, the decision was always cast in the context: how does this choice move our mission forward? And every role, every practice, every role, practice, and system. How does this role? How does this practice? How does this system move us forward in fulfilling our mission? And so if we can't answer the question, why are we doing this, and have the answer live in the context of our furthering our mission, then we're leaking energy. And that's another aspect of why congregational ministry is in decline right now, is because all the doings aren't necessarily in alignment with pulling the organization and its community into a singularity of purpose that matters, that creates something that people can be drawn into as a part of a growing excitement or momentum for something great.
And congregational ministries are down like across denominations. This isn't a new thought thing, right? This is all denominations. The concept of the traditional church and showing up and being fed and going away. I was thinking that mission statements and shadow work and collective buy-in all has to do with individuals deciding or agreeing to put their ego aside. Like it has to be for the betterment of the organization. So how do you get individuals to openly say, this is not about me, this is about the organization? Like, this seems like a big jump to get a whole lot of people to agree to put their ego down.
Right. Well, so that's a problem, and it's also it's also something that you have to work with. So, you know, so we created a shadow work program called the Quantum Living Process, and we introduced it right off the bat when we first got there. As a matter of fact, we did a portion of it during our tryout. And so we were able to get in our congregation of almost 200 people, over 500 people through the Quantum Living Process in that ministry. And when you have such an influx of people who are really clear that when I'm triggered, it's because I'm living in my own sense of not enough, or in my own inadequacy, or in my own unworthiness. You don't have the power to make me feel this. It happens from within me. When you have a congregation that has that depth of self-awareness, the ego part of it subsides. And so this is something that Wilbur also is really focused on. And if we don't teach development to our congregations, they don't know that they can evolve out of victimhood. People don't know that they can actually evolve out of their own sense of not enough. But in order to do that, you have to do the deeper integration work to get to a place where you're no longer trying to get more, but rather motivated to be more. And that's where the real shift happens in congregational ministry, is when there's a commitment to a depth of the cleanup portion of this work.
So it's ultimately about changing the individual standpoint, and then a more congregational based church evolves out of that, as opposed to trying to change to a congregational model or less minister centric model and then hoping that they all fall in line. It's more about individuals changing first, and then the result being a less minister focused.
So it takes time to shift culture, and
Like
that's
12 minutes, 15.
No, probably about 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
But so part of my learning was how to shift culture, and then that's something that we're not taught either in ministerial school, because that's a hard thing. And when someone is when someone understands it takes 3 to 5 years to change something, there has to be the capacity to move incrementally towards cultural tipping points. And so you begin with introducing something to the innovators, to the early adopters, and have them really own something, and then the established core begins to see, oh, well, wait a minute, what's going on over there? I don't want to be left out. And then all of a sudden there's a tipping point that more people have been through the Quantum Living Process than not. And when that happens, the culture becomes committed to this new way. And then after several years, there was very few people only the new people hadn't done the Quantum Living Process. So once culture begins to shift, then new people, in order for them to stay in the church, would have to do the Quantum Living Process, because otherwise they wouldn't be aligned with the heart of the ministry, which lives in this sense that we're here to free ourselves from our self-imposed limitations. And if a person's not able or willing to engage in that intentionality, they probably won't find our center someplace that they feel home.
I'm glad you said that, because I was just thinking about when cultures shift, and this has happened in the business world too, the corporate world. When cultures shift, there are going to be people that fall away, and leadership and religious or corporations, right? They're so worried about people falling away. But ultimately, isn't that better? It's like sloughing off dead skin, right? Like, isn't it better for the growth in general? Like, if we're going in this direction, and if that is not a thing that you are on board with, I wish you well and light, but this is where we're going. But I feel like there's so much fear about saying
Anyone
no
go.
to some people. Yeah.
Sure. We live in New Thought in what's called the green meme. It's a dimension of the spiral of our developmental spiral that highly values connection and community and inclusivity, and so we become attached to people and we don't want to let them go, and we do a lot of probably not very healthy things to kind of manage trying to keep people where they are. And so it's important to recognize, and this is another thing that I came to as I developed the model, was that we have to be capable of hospicing what needs to be released and midwifing what needs to be brought forth. There's lots that has to be hospice in our current ministry practice, and very little to midwife until we reach a point of emotional and spiritual maturity where we can see that we have to get over our ego, we have to get over herding cats, our herding cat identity, and we actually have to come together to accomplish something that's great, that's important, that's vital, that's necessary. And right now, church doesn't elicit that kind of commitment from people. We're more into, are you okay? Is everything fine? What's going on with you? As opposed to, hey, look what we're creating. Come join us, be a part of it. So it's a different shift.
Yeah, and it ties into, and I think anyone in leadership recognizes this, is how much energy and time are you putting into moving forward? So many things we have are set up triaging, the problems and trying to maintain what is, but the amount of energy or time that's put into moving forward is almost lost entirely. And it's just like life itself. Like the more you focus on the problems in your life, the more time and energy they're going to take up of your life. And the more you invest in improving your life or finding a way out or finding a way around or looking at where you can go next, the more those things start to come to you and expose themselves to you because you're putting energy to them. And it's like people that say, I'm going to start going to night school. I just got to get a better job. So they commit to that and they start doing that. But if you're just focused on the job that's not working at hand, you're not going to go anywhere. There's got to be an energetic investment and financial investment in moving forward. But, in ministry and in business, you see that most of the energy wants to sustain what is. They want to keep it the way it is because whether it's dysfunctional or not, that's what they're comfortable with. And it's sort of the devil you know versus the devil you don't. You're like, well, I'll take the devil I know. This might not be a great job, but who knows what could be out there. So we all work to sustain what is, even if it's dysfunctional and we know it's not healthy for us. So the amount of energy to push us out of that can be huge initially, but the rewards are so massive, and not even a personal life level, cultural level, business level, church level. It takes so much energy to keep moving forward because there's that initial resistance. But once you create that momentum, I imagine that it becomes easier and you start to see the benefits unfolding. And I imagine that's what you saw in your last ministry.
Well, what I saw in my last ministry was that we had to do something totally different than the way in which I and Jane and all of us do ministry. I'm just as much a minister-centric minister as the next person. So I had to learn how to let go of a lot of things that, as a minister, I was attached to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a controlling person. I don't know if anybody realizes that or not. But the last thing I wanted to do is let go of all the things that I felt like I needed to kind of be in charge of, and really trust in in taking responsibility for developing the people there that were there to serve. I mean, all ministries come with folks already plugged in and ready to do stuff, but not necessarily capable of really holding a higher dimension of what is capable, because we're all grounded in and conditioned by our previous experiences. So it was our good fortune that our community was willing to try something totally different. And we proposed to them that this would be quite different than what you're used to. And so they gave us enough spaciousness to be able to experiment and try things and figure things out in a way that most ministers wouldn't necessarily find in a church, that just assuming leadership from a transition. So part of the challenge is that if we're going to be relevant in the future, with the current decline, we're affected by it. If we're going to be relevant and kind of turn the tide, we have to have a different ministry practice that is not susceptible to the same kinds of problems and unintended consequences that our current ministry practice is subjected to. The funding issue is another big problem with congregational ministry. And so our tithing practice is no longer sustains the operational expenses of most churches. And when we think about how our system, our minister-centered system is set up, it's set up to live in the sense that if you feel spiritually fed, you will support us. And so that's the context of the paradigm of our current ministry model. And so we set ourselves up for having to be dependent upon pleasing people, making sure that they're okay or feel served or valued or appreciated. And all of that is reinforcing the dysfunction and also focusing on sourcing one's well-being or one's discomfort out there in the outer. So there's no fixing this ministry practice. We have to evolve out of it.
Do you think that there's a place for minister-centric ministry? I mean, do you think that some people are at a current place where they need that sort of relationship in their life, that works for them?
Absolutely. I'm not wanting to be heard as someone who's dissuading anyone's current practice, especially if it's working for you. And there are lots of churches that are functioning well in the current model, and the minister-centric practice has a high degree of intimacy and connection and care. It's just that it's problematic in times of transition, in times of disruption and not enough. It's vulnerable to too many issues, but it's not something that is. Let us just say that in some respects, we begin the evolutionary process as minister-centered in order to create a community that is beholden to the principles that we're wanting to ultimately release the community and the ministry into demonstrating. And so in the beginning, if you're like, for instance, pioneering, I pioneered some churches, it had to be minister-centered, because that was required in order to bring people into the experience of community. And then once the community becomes established, then we have to set in front of the community a higher purpose than just us gathering together. And so what is the higher purpose? Transforming lives, inspiring people to make a positive difference in our world.
Well, it seems like the world is evolving. The way people relate to each other is evolving. And so that maybe the minister-centric model was really efficient for a time, but it's becoming less so as we're starting to look at the world differently. And I think about our movement that, we had this boom in ministries probably through the 40s, through the late 80s, early 90s, and that it was minister-centric, and it really worked. And like we had, my father says all I had to do was open the doors, and people were climbing to get in through the windows because the doors weren't big enough. There was that period of time where you didn't have to advertise. You just had to open your doors with this message, and people were there. But then that stopped working, and we saw this drastic decline. And it feels like we just didn't recognize that the people themselves were shifting. Consciousness was shifting, and it would require a new model. So like you were saying, like, yeah, we might have built these churches up and ministries up with the minister-centric idea, but we were supposed to start shifting them so that they could continue to grow. So we didn't hold them where they were, but to begin a shift maybe in the 80s to mission-oriented so that we could have kept thriving into the recent era we're in, but that we missed that boat. And so we saw this giant decline.
I don't know that we missed the boat. I just think that we didn't have enough evolutionary drivers to kind of really necessitate an abandonment of our current ministry practice. So I'm an innovator, and most of my clients are early adopters, but they still had to deal with resistance within their own community, just in the most simple of basic shifts, And so it's almost as if there has to be the recognition that our current ministry practice is not working optimally, and that if we don't take into consideration the trends, such as the nuns moved from 8% to 25% of people in the adults in North America that don't have anything to do with religion. There are the duns; those are baby boomers who are just tired of the plot, pay, pray model of ministry. And there's all kinds of factors now that there's twice as many charitable organizations and the same amount of charitable dollars. The churches have to compete in different ways in these times. So there are a number of factors that are affecting congregational ministry. So we are forced to have to discern a different way of coming together that can create sustainability in these times.
Do you think, Melissa, just chime in if you've got anything, because I just keep talking.
I know.
You're familiar with that. It's nothing new. Do you think the world of online ministry, so much of ministry is going online, that better resonates with mission-centric, or does that make that more difficult to try to make it work?
Well, so we've had to discover, having, COVID and all, and having to shift to all being online and stuff. So interestingly for us, we had been working towards moving people to automatic giving as opposed to giving only on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So by the time the pandemic hit, we had already 75% of our congregation in some form of automatic giving. So we were able to manage with the PPP also. But the idea is for my clients, when they went to online, not in person, much of their coaching program kind of had to be kind of suspended in some ways, because in part there are aspects of needing to deal with the dynamics of ministry, and if you're not in those dynamics, you can't necessarily deal with them per se.
Right.
So I would say that, especially as we are moving now into it's no longer either or, online or in person. It's mostly both and for so many. I'm thinking that there's aspects of my model, the integral ministry model, that can be applied to any dynamic, any. It can even be applied to organizations. I haven't quite gotten all that way yet, but as we create integral community, folks, there are folks in in Unity who are just as intelligent and conversant in integral theory as I am. As we bring all these folks together and create a kind of awareness of these principles, people who understand them will see them, and they will enter into an engagement of them. It's just that we have such a small amount of people who are really familiar with these ideas.
Do you think
things like online is an easy way to almost slip backwards and go back to just a please feed me model? Like, I'm not here for you. It takes, it takes leadership at the church to get the online thing going, but really it's the sermon and the music, and you're delivering. It is a one-way street and less about giving back. So it almost seems like a big push forward for ego, for Feed Me, like away from, this is a community and I'm part of it and we're building something together. It was a very easy step backwards to, all right, I need to be fed now. I'll just sit here and receive.
Well, that certainly can be a trap that communities fall into, especially if that's kind of the nature of how church was for them. They come get fed and get their fix and then come back each time. For us, I believe that Jane and I managed our online experience really well because we created a series where we had people engaged in the material, and then we would after the service we would meet on Zoom for anybody who wanted to go dive deeper and talk about things. And so we had engagement. So I agree, Melissa, that if it's just a Sunday experience, you're conditioning a kind of didactic approach to our experience of ministry and our interaction with these ideas and principles. So it's important that churches, if they are online, that they augment the dynamic, that they have to have book studies or groups or something that helps people in conversation, not didactic, not one way, in order to be able to maintain a sense of community and connection.
So I spoke at Reverend Aaron McCabe's church here on property at Unity Village last Sunday, and she was actually talking about that dynamic and that they've done a lot of work in trying to keep the engagement in their online community. So they stream to Facebook, their website, and they stream to Zoom so that people can have a live conversation while they're watching this. And she said they've had some really engaged congregants in the Detroit area. And she said those congregants, through the group work they've been doing, heard that a congregant who lives here in the Unity Village area, Lee Summit area, actually went to the hospital and had some issues. And she was blown away that the congregants in Detroit actually sent money to buy food for that family while they were dealing with this person in the hospital. And so that they felt just as connected as if they were in that room or they'd been in that study group with them, and they couldn't physically go and make them food, but they could send money to purchase them food to do the same act that they would have done if they had been there in person. It was a real eye-opening experience for her to be able to see this connection can still happen as long as you figure out ways to bridge this gap of distance. And they did. They said, well, we can still care for this family that we now know and love from a distance and do it this way. So, and I think you're right. It's really, what kind of culture are you establishing into the online experience? You've got to take that into the online experience or build it as you're building that online experience, not just expecting it's going to be there, because there is the real easiness of just showing up in pajamas and saying, all right, feed me, I'm done, I'm going to go back to lunch now and do what I was doing type mindset. So I think... Are you
still wearing your pajamas at lunchtime, Shad?
I change into them while at work, just eat my lunch, and then I go back to what I was doing. So I think, ministers, traditional ministers, hearing about this and thinking about this, for them, there's the reality of, can this new model fund me? Can I live off of this new model? Can I, feed my family? Can I survive off of a model where I'm no longer the center of it? That's not so much about paying the minister, it's about investing in a mission. And I don't know if you've run into that or if that's something that you see, sort of bubbling up in people.
So all I can speak to is the experience of my coaching clients and what they're going through. And so all of them are now moving towards this new funding model, the spiritual cooperative that I've devised, that we have field tested in Spokane, which is based upon the idea that if everyone was doing equally their fair share, we would come up with one amount that we would need from every adult every month. And so that's called the spiritual cooperative share. And then we ask people, if they can, to meet or exceed it, just to do what they can do. And a certain portion of people do meet or exceed the spiritual cooperative share. And those that don't, we just ask them to make their gift automatics so that we can count on it. Mm-hmm. And then every year we invite people to help us move the needles so that we have more people involved in automatic giving so that effort amounts to more and more towards the operational expenses. And every year we increase the numbers of people that meet or exceed the cooperative share. And so in time, and because we have built into our membership system, the integral membership system, a phased approach to bringing people into greater ownership and partnership in the organization, a person is brought into a community member and they're invited to meet or exceed the spiritual cooperative share. Mm-hmm. And so people, for the most part, we have 30-40% are able to, and the rest are just tell us what they can count on. And every year there's been a projected increase of income, and it has demonstrated its efficacy, but it takes time in order for it to unfold.
So what becomes the role of the minister, of the spiritual leader, whoever it is, in that system? If it's mission centric, and you've stepped out of being the center of that world, what are you now doing? What does that look like?
Well, I'm still a minister.
He's doing podcasts now.
I'm still the minister or the co-minister in Spokane, and we have all the responsibilities that our current practice has, except that we have a different way of leading. Our work is not directing; it's more coaching. So we're coaching people into a transformational experience. And it's not just in dealing with shadow work, but it's in dealing with the dynamics of church. And so we do things quite differently in the mission-centric ministry practice that frees the minister from some of the drudgery of the top-down model that minister-centric ministry is. So I feel like I have partners. And so as a minister, to have partners that share in the effort creates a kind of community around leadership. And so as Jan and I have sought to develop our leaders, our board, our licensed unity teachers, and those who are key volunteers, actually taking them through transformative experiences that deepen their own sense of connection and personal empowerment. And that's the fun part of being a minister, when we still have pastoral care to do. And so when people come for spiritual counseling, they often bring their quantum living process workbook because they want to be debriefed. And so it makes everything so much easier than having to hold all of it and deal with dysfunction and triangulation and parking lot conversations. When you don't have to deal with that, there's all kinds of fun things that happen around moving things forward, as opposed to trying to fix and put out fires and stuff.
So I wonder if you could talk about, you mentioned it a couple times, but the idea of small groups, right? That's I said that at Unity of Las Vegas, that it seemed like my personal growth did not happen on Sunday listening to Shad yap at me. My growth happened when I was in a small group of people where I could be open and honest and vulnerable, and I could get words out and hear back, and that's where my growth happened. Did you find that that's true in the new model? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, part of the requirements for being in my coaching program is that you participate in spirit groups, small group ministry. So because the studies have shown that a didactic approach to learning about one's reality, one's truth, is not as transformative as people, as you have described, Melissa, together in a safe, vulnerable way of being able to just open themselves to the experience and not have to feel defensive or judged, but just rather accepted. Mm-hmm. That has such a powerful capacity to move people into a greater experience of well-being than just hearing a real powerful talk. So yes, absolutely. It's integral to the future of congregational ministries to have a we space experience that is both transactional in the sense that people are really engaging each other, as well as coming together to connect in a way that
helps them experience the presence of God as opposed to just talk about it.
I also found in bigger churches, like in the mega church here, that the growth was actually happening in the small groups. Like I'm going to go to a small group meeting, right? Women in their whatever, or a family meeting. And then I build a community, and then I start going on Sundays as well. And then I start contributing, and then I become a part of the community. But that it's an easier transition, I guess, than showing up on Sunday for some. That it's another way to get the growth to happen.
Yes.
And I always found it fascinating as a minister myself. In the small groups, I was getting the most growth. I was, the facilitating the group, but hearing what they thought of something I said on Sunday, or hearing their feedback, or hearing something they would say that I had not even considered in relation to what we were talking about, I was getting the most growth out of that experience. And really, when I worked with the youth, and I do work with our teenagers or our junior high to teenage group, the questions they would have and the way they would approach a topic was so out of the realm of where I was thinking. It made me shift my brain to really start thinking at it from a different perspective, where they were coming from. And I found so much growth in that experience as well, to put me into a place that's not my age range, not my race, not my demographic. It's something different. And now I'm exposed to a completely different perspective that I'm having to go, wow, I never saw it that way. I remember saying that so many times. Well, I never thought of it that way. That's interesting. And being put in those situations, it really is where that growth happens and where you get challenged to think a different way. Because on Sunday, you're only hearing it from your perspective, and you're processing it from your perspective, the same perspective you've always had. But in a group setting, someone goes, oh, I saw it this way. It's the only time you're really hearing another perspective or being exposed to another perspective in the world other than your own.
Right. And being exposed and capable of holding various perspectives is a sign of integral, is second tier. So the more perspectives that you can allow to coexist without kind of, oh, this one doesn't belong here, is a sign of spiritual maturity.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good.
I was just saying, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good too.
All right. I feel complete.
Pretty complete.
I think that's a good point. I know we could probably go on for another 17 hours or so.
Absolutely. This is going to be a 35-part series.
But this sounds like a good spot. And to bring it around to the fact that group work is where the growth happens, I think that's one of the things that could heal what's happening in the world today. The isolationism and the perspective and the idea that I see the world correctly from where I'm standing just can't exist when you start exposing yourself to where other people are standing.
Yes. All
right. Well, we want to thank...
Final words by
Oh,
Shay.
final word. Yeah, we'll add that as a segment.
That's a new segment.
Actually, I've got to go back in and edit a little section out of our last podcast, because when we started the podcast and I accidentally hit the end meeting button instead of the record button, somehow it kept recording even though it closed on my screen.
Oh.
So the video actually has me going, oh no, like this whole thing happening. So I'm going to I'll have to edit that and put it up somewhere. It's pretty funny. All right. Well, we invite you to comment
and share
and to follow
and like
and to subscribe
and to try to be
a little less serious.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye-bye.